My name is Anne Whitaker, and when I was 14 years old, my stepmother packed my clothes into 2 trash bags 3 days after my father's funeral and told me I was no longer her responsibility. She said it gently, too. That was the part and we never forgot. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even look ashamed. She stood in the doorway of the room that had been mine since I was 6 years old, holding a folded sweater in her hands, and said, "Your uncle has money, Anne. He can give you a better life than I can." As if she was doing me a favor. As if throwing out a grieving child was just a practical arrangement. 15 years later, that same woman walked into my uncle's will reading wearing a black dress, pearl earrings, and the kind of sad smile people practice in mirrors before funerals. Beside her was her daughter, my stepsister, Vanessa, and behind them came a private attorney carrying a leather
briefcase.
They were confident, they were calm, they were absolutely certain they were about to walk out with millions. But then my uncle's lawyer opened a sealed folder, pulled out a document my stepmother had signed 15 years earlier, and read one sentence that made her face turn completely white. Before I tell you what that sentence was, I need you to understand something. My stepmother didn't throw out a random orphan. She threw out the last living piece of the man she claimed to love. And that was the part that came back to destroy her. If stories about family betrayal, inheritance, and people finally facing the consequences of their choices are the kind of stories you listen to, stay with me. And before we go back to where it all started, tell me where you're listening from right now. I always wonder how far a story like mine can travel. My mother died when I was 4 years old. Her name was Grace, and most of what I know about her came from photographs, birthday cards, and the way my father's voice changed whenever he said her name. I remember tiny pieces of her. The smell of vanilla lotion, a blue scarf she wore in winter, the way she used to press her forehead against mine and whisper, "There's my brave girl." But memories from that age are strange. Some are real, some are built later from stories other people tell you. I've never been completely sure where my mother ends and where my imagination begins. My father, Daniel Whitaker, loved her in a quiet, broken way after she died. He worked as a project manager for a construction company in Cleveland, and for almost 2 years after her funeral, it was just the 2 of us in our small, yellow house with the cracked front steps and the maple tree in the yard. He made bad pancakes on Saturdays. He forgot to buy the right shampoo. He packed my lunches with strange combinations, like peanut butter sandwiches and cold spaghetti in the same lunchbox. But he tried, that was what mattered. He tried. When I was 6, he married Marlene. Marlene had a daughter from her first marriage, Vanessa, who was 2 years older than me. Vanessa was 8 when they moved into our house with 3 pink suitcases, a box full of dolls she never shared, and a smile that disappeared whenever my father wasn't looking. At first, I wanted to love them. I wanted a mother again so badly that I ignored every warning sign. When Marlene brushed my hair too hard and told me to stop being tender-headed, I told myself mothers were just like that sometimes. When she bought Vanessa new school shoes and told me mine could last another year, I told myself maybe money was tight. When she hung framed pictures of herself, my father, and Vanessa in the hallway, but moved the photos of my real mother into a box in the closet, I told myself maybe it hurt my dad too much to see them. Children can explain away almost anything when they need a family to survive. For years, my father was the thin wall between me and the truth. He was not perfect. I need to say that honestly. He loved me, but he hated conflict. If Marlene said I was being difficult, he would sigh and tell me to be patient. If Vanessa took something from my room, he would ask me to be the bigger person. If I cried because Marlene had forgotten my school concert, he would rub his forehead and say, "She's trying, Annie. Give her time, Annie." He was the only person who called me that. And because he loved me, because he kissed my forehead before work and saved the last slice of pie for me when no one was looking, I convinced myself everything was fine. It wasn't fine, it was just survivable while he was alive. Marlene's love was a room with a locked door. Vanessa had the key. I stood outside and learned not to knock. Vanessa got dance classes, birthday dinners, new clothes before every school year, and a bedroom redecorated twice before she turned 15. I got practical things. A winter coat from a clearance rack. I used laptop because my grades were good and my teachers said I needed one. A birthday cake from the grocery store with my name squeezed awkwardly into frosting because Marlene had bought it the same afternoon. None of those things sound cruel by themselves. That is how people like Marlene survive being judged. Every single action can be explained away. But when you live inside it, day after day, year after year, you understand the pattern. Vanessa was her daughter. I was her husband's daughter. There was a difference, and everyone in the house knew it. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October. I was 14, he was 42. A heart attack took him before the ambulance arrived. One moment, he was in the kitchen tying his work boots, complaining that the coffee tasted burnt. The next, he was on the floor, one hand gripping his chest, his eyes wide with confusion. I still remember the sound my own voice made when I screamed for Marlene. Not words, just panic. At the funeral, Marlene performed grief beautifully. She leaned against the casket. She accepted hugs. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She told everyone Daniel had been the love of her life. I stood beside her in a black dress that was too short in the sleeves because I had grown since the last time anyone bought me formal clothes. People kept touching my shoulder and saying, "You poor thing," as if I had become an object. As if everyone could see what I had not fully understood yet. My father had been my only protection, and now he was gone. 3 days after the funeral, Marlene knocked on my bedroom door. She didn't wait for me to answer. She came in holding 2 black trash bags. At first, I thought she wanted me to clean. Then she opened my dresser and started pulling out my clothes. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Your Uncle Robert is coming tomorrow." My father's older brother, Robert Whitaker, lived in Chicago. I had met him maybe 6 times in my life. Mostly at holidays and once when he came to visit after my mother died. He was rich in the way adults whispered about. He owned apartment buildings, commercial spaces, maybe even hotels. I didn't really understand it then. I just knew he wore expensive watches and sent birthday cards with checks inside. "Why is Uncle Robert coming?" I asked. Marlene folded one of my sweaters and placed it into the trash bag. "Because you're going to live with him." I stared at her, waiting for the part where she explained this was temporary. A few weeks, maybe, until things settled. She kept packing. "What do you mean, live with him?" That was when she finally turned around. Her face was calm, almost kind. "And I can't do this. Your father's gone, I'm faring. I have Vanessa to think about. The house, the bills, everything. Robert has money. He has space. He can take care of you." I felt like the floor had tilted. "But this is my home." Marlene's expression tightened just a little. "It was your father's home." That sentence was the first honest thing she ever said to me. I didn't cry immediately. I think my body was too shocked. I just watched her take my clothes, my books, my framed photo of my mother, my little jewelry box, and put my life into garbage bags. Vanessa stood in the hallway watching. She was 16 then, old enough to know exactly what was happening. She didn't say a word. At one point, Marlene handed her a stack of my books and said, "Put these by the front door." Vanessa took them. She looked at me once, then looked away. The next afternoon, Uncle Robert arrived in a black car that looked too expensive for our cracked driveway. I was sitting on the porch with my trash bags beside me. Marlene had told me to wait outside because she didn't want a scene. It was cold, not freezing, but cold enough that my fingers hurt. I had been out there for almost 2 hours when Uncle Robert pulled up. He got out of the car slowly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Then he saw the trash bags. Something changed in him. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved from the bags to me, to the front door where Marlene was standing with her. Arms folded. He walked up the steps, crouched in front of me, and said, "And did she put your things in trash bags?" I nodded. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, his voice was quiet. Go sit in the car. It's warm. I stood up, but before I reached the driveway, I heard him speak to Marlene. Not loudly, that was what made it scarier. She just buried her father, Marlene said, and I just buried my husband. She is 14, and I am not her mother. The silence after that sentence felt like something breaking. Uncle Robert said, "No, you are not." I turned around. Marlene's face flushed. Robert stepped inside the house with her. I didn't know what happened in there. I didn't know they were signing papers. I didn't know that Marlene was putting her name on a legal document that would one day become the most important piece of paper in my life. All I knew was that 20 minutes later, Uncle Robert came out carrying a folder in one hand and my mother's photograph in the other. He handed me the photo when he got into the car. She had no right to pack this away, he said. I held the frame against my chest as we pulled out of the driveway. Marlene didn't wave. Vanessa watched from the living room window, and just like that, I left the only home I had ever known. Uncle Robert's house in Chicago was nothing like ours. I sat on a quiet street in Lincoln Park, 3 stories of brick and tall windows, with a black iron gate and a kitchen bigger than our old living room. I remember standing in the foyer with my trash bags, feeling dirty and small and completely out of place. A woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who worked as his housekeeper and had known him for 20 years, took one look at me and said, "Oh baby," that was all, "oh baby." Then she hugged me. I broke down so hard my knees nearly gave out. That first year was not magical. I'm quite pretend it was. I was grieving. I was angry. I was embarrassed. I've missed my father so badly that sometimes I woke up reaching for my phone to call him. Before I remembered he was dead. Uncle Robert was not naturally warm. He was a businessman, not a parent. He didn't know what to do with a teenage girl who cried silently at dinner and flinched whenever adults raised their voices. But he tried, and trying, I had learned, mattered. He enrolled me in a good school. He found me a therapist. He bought me furniture and asked me what color I wanted my bedroom painted. When I said I didn't care, he came home with 6 paint samples and said, "Then we'll care until you do." That was Uncle Robert. Practical love, quiet love, the kind that did not make speeches but showed up. One night, a few months after I moved in, I found him sitting alone in his study, staring at a photo of my father. I almost walked away, but he saw me. "You look like Grace," he said. My mother. No one had said that to me in years. "Marlene said I looked too much like my dad," I whispered. His eyes hardened. "Marlene says many things that are not worth keeping." I stood in the doorway, twisting my sleeves. Did Dad know she didn't want me? Uncle Robert looked down at the photo. "I think your father knew more than he wanted to admit." That hurt, but it was honest. He gestured for me to sit. "Your father loved you, Anne, but love without courage can still fail a child." I hated that sentence when he said it. Years later, I understood it was one of the truest things anyone had ever told me. By the time I was 16, I had stopped waiting for Marlene to call. She never did, not on my birthday, not on Christmas, not on the anniversary of my father's death. Vanessa sent one message when I was 15. "Hope you're okay," 3 words. I stared at them for a long time, then deleted them. Uncle Robert never pushed me to forgive them. He never told me anger was unhealthy or that family was family. He had a particular hatred for that phrase. "Family is not a magic word," he told me once. "It is a responsibility. People who abandon the responsibility don't get to keep the title." He had built Whitaker Holdings from nothing. His first property had been a 6th-unit apartment building on the south side that everyone told him not to buy. By the time I came to live with him, he owned apartment complexes, small retail centers, and 2 boutique hotels. At first, the business meant nothing to me. Then, slowly, it became the place where I learned I was useful. I started filing papers after school. Then I learned spreadsheets, then leases, then vendor contracts. Then tenant disputes. Uncle Robert never handed me praise easily, which made it feel real when he did. At 17, I caught a billing error from one of the maintenance contractors that had been costing the company almost $8,000 a month. Uncle Robert looked at the report I had made, looked at me, and said, "Good eye." I lived off those 2 words for weeks. I graduated high school with honors. I went to Northwestern for economics. Uncle Robert paid what scholarship didn't cover, but he made me work summers at the company anyway. "Money can open a door," he said. "It cannot walk through it for you." By 25, I was working full-time at Whitaker Holdings as Director of Operations. By 27, I was Chief Operating Officer. By 29, the year Uncle Robert died, I was managing a portfolio worth almost $31 million. He never married, he never had children, or at least that was what everyone thought. 2 years after I moved in, when I was 16, Uncle Robert adopted me. He asked me first. We were sitting in his study, the same room where he had told me love without courage could fail a child. He looked nervous, which was rare for him. "I want to ask you something," he said. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk. "I would like to adopt you, legally. Only if you want that." I stared at the papers. My throat closed. He spoke quickly, like he was afraid silence would hurt me. "This would not erase your mother. It would not erase Daniel. I would never ask for that. But it would mean that legally, I am responsible for you. Permanently, it would mean no one can treat you like temporary cargo again." A temporary cargo. That was exactly how Marlene had made me feel. I cried before I could answer. Uncle Robert looked terrified. "Is that a no?" I shook my head and laughed through the tears. "No, it's a yes." The adoption was finalized quietly. No big party. No announcement, Mrs. Alvarez made a chocolate cake. Uncle Robert gave me a necklace with a small silver key pendant. "What does it open?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "That's the point. You don't need a key anymore. This is your home." I never took that necklace off. The only time Marlene contacted us after that was when money became involved. The first call came when I was 18. She called Uncle Robert's office, not me. Vanessa was applying to colleges and needed help with tuition. Marlene said my father would have wanted his brother to help. Uncle Robert asked if she had used the survivor benefits and life insurance money from my father responsibly. She hung up. I didn't know the full meaning of that question until years later. The second call came when I was 22. Marlene had fallen behind on the mortgage. She said the house had been Daniel's and therefore Robert should care what happened to it. He offered to buy it at fair market value and put the money in a trust that Marlene couldn't touch, with half reserved for me because it had been my childhood home. She called him cruel and hung up again. The third contact came through Vanessa. She sent me a Facebook message when I was 26. "Hey Anne, I know things were weird when we were kids, but Mom is struggling. Uncle Robert has so much. Maybe you could talk to him? Things were weird." That was how she described watching me get packed into trash bags after my father died. I didn't respond by then. I had built a life that did not include them, and I thought that was the end of it. Then Uncle Robert got sick, pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. The doctor said 6 months. He lasted 9. Those 9 months were the hardest of my adult life. Uncle Robert, who had always seemed carved from stone, became thinner, slower, quieter, but his mind stayed sharp until the final week. He spent a lot of time with his attorney, Margaret Bell. Margaret was in her 60s, elegant, severe, and impossible to intimidate. She had been Uncle Robert's attorney for over 20 years. I trusted her because he trusted her. One evening, about 3 months before he died, I found him in his study signing documents. "More business stuff?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Something like that. Do I need to know?" "Not yet." I sat across from him. "I hate when you do mysterious old man things." "I'm not that old. You are absolutely doing mysterious old man things." He laughed, then started coughing so hard I had to bring him water. When it passed, he looked at me for a long time, And when I'm gone, some people may try to rewrite history. I knew who he meant, Marlene. And perhaps Vanessa. She has no claim to anything. People don't need a claim to make trouble, he said. They only need enough entitlement to convince themselves they've been robbed. I crossed my arms. What did you do? He tapped the folder. I told the truth, carefully in writing. That was all he would say. Uncle Robert died on a rainy morning in April, with me sitting beside his hospital bed, holding his hand the way he had held mine when I was 14. His last clear words to me were, "You were never a burden." I bent over his hand and cried like the child I had once been. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks later. 3 days before it, Margaret called me. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. "And have you received any contact from Marlene Whitaker?" My stomach turned. "No." "Why?" "She has retained counsel." I closed my eyes. "Of course she has. Her attorney sent a notice this morning. Marlene and Vanessa intend to attend the will reading. They are also preparing to challenge the estate." I laughed once without humor. "On what grounds?" "Undue influence. They claim you isolated Robert from his family and manipulated him into leaving everything to you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had spent 15 years becoming useful, responsible, disciplined. I had sat through chemotherapy appointments. I had managed his medications. I had run his company while sleeping 3 hours a night. I had held his hand while he died. And Marlene, who had not called once during his illness, was accusing me of manipulation. Margaret continued, "There's more." "Of course there is. They're suggesting that Marlene deserves compensation because she facilitated your move into Robert's care after your father died." Her attorney's phrase was, "the act that allowed Anne Whitaker to become Robert's heir." I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward. "She threw me out, I know. She packed my clothes into trash bags. I know. She is saying she deserves money because she abandoned me." Margaret was quiet for a second. "Yes," I pressed my hand against my mouth. Not because I was going to cry. Because I was afraid of what I might say. Margaret said Robert anticipated this possibility. I looked toward the framed photo of Uncle Robert on my desk. "What does that mean?" "It means you should come to my office tomorrow. There are documents you need to see before the reading." Margaret's office was on the 38th floor of a building downtown, with a view of the Chicago River cutting between glass towers. I barely noticed any of it. She had a folder waiting for me. A thick one. "I want to show you something," she said. She opened the folder and slid the first document across the desk. The heading read, "Voluntary Transfer of Custodial Rights and Guardianship Consent." Dated October 18, 2010. 4 days after my father's funeral. My hands went cold. The document stated that Marlene Whitaker, surviving spouse of Daniel Whitaker and legal guardian of Anne Grace Whitaker, following Daniel's death, voluntarily transferred all custodial authority and decision-making rights regarding Anne Grace Whitaker to Robert James Whitaker. It also stated that Marlene waived any future claim to financial support, reimbursement, custody, or parental authority related to me. At the bottom was her signature, Marlene Elaine Whitaker. Beside it was Uncle Robert's. There was also a notary stamp. I stared at the page until the words blurred. "She signed me away," I whispered. Margaret's voice softened. "Yes." She stood there and told me Uncle Robert could give me a better life. And then she signed this? "Yes." "Did my father know this could happen?" "No," Margaret said. "Your father's will named Marlene as your guardian because she was his wife. He trusted her to care for you." That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted Marlene to have kept me, but because my father, even in death, had believed she would protect me. And she had betrayed that belief before the ground settled over his grave. Margaret slid another document across the table. This one I recognized. My adoption papers, finalized 2 years later. "Robert legally adopted you in 2012, she said. "That made you his daughter in every legal sense." Marlene's argument is weak on its face, But Robert was concerned she would try something anyway, so he left specific instructions. What instructions? Margaret folded her hands. If Marlene or Vanessa attempted to challenge the will, he wanted the guardianship document, adoption papers, and a written statement of facts read aloud at the will proceeding. I looked up. He wanted it read aloud? Yes, in front of them? In front of all interested parties. For a long moment, I said nothing. Margaret waited. She was good at that. Finally, I asked, "Is there another way?" "There is always another way. We can approach her attorney privately, show him the documents, offer a small settlement in exchange for a waiver and confidentiality." How small? Given the size of the estate, perhaps $250,000. Enough to make them go away. I almost laughed. $250,000 to reward the woman who threw me out. Margaret watched me carefully. It would avoid confrontation. I thought about 14-year-old me sitting on the porch, holding my mother's photograph while Marlene stood in the doorway looking relieved. I thought about my father's casket. I thought about Uncle Robert telling me family was a responsibility, not a magic word. "No," I said. Margaret nodded once. "No settlement?" "No settlement, no confidentiality." She wanted to come to the will reading. Let her hear the will. The will reading took place on a Friday afternoon. I arrived early. I wore a dark green suit because Uncle Robert once told me I looked like my mother when I wore green. My hair was pulled back. Around my neck was the silver key pendant he had given me when the adoption was finalized. Margaret's conference room was long and bright, with a polished table that could seat 18 people. Representatives from 2 charities Uncle Robert supported were there, along with senior employees from Whitaker Holdings, the company accountant, and 2 members of Margaret's legal team. At exactly 2:07 p.m., Marlene arrived. She looked older but not softer. Her hair was styled carefully. Her black dress looked expensive. Vanessa walked beside her in a navy coat, eyes lowered, mouth tight. Their attorney introduced himself as Charles Benton. He had the smooth voice of a man who charged by the hour and enjoyed saying the word. Litigation. Marlene's eyes found me immediately. For one strange second, I saw surprise in her face. Maybe she expected the 14-year-old from the porch. Maybe she expected grief to make me small again. Instead, I was sitting at the main table with Uncle Robert's attorney on my right and 15 years of chosen family around me. "And," she said. "Marlene." Her mouth tightened. "Not Mom, never Mom." She stepped closer. "I was hoping we could speak privately before this begins." "No!" The word came out clean. Her eyebrows lifted. "No? You heard me." Charles Benton cleared his throat. "Miss Whitaker, my client is hoping to resolve this matter respectfully. There are family considerations here." I looked at him. "There are legal proceedings here. Family would have required showing up before there was money involved." The room went quiet. Marlene's expression hardened. "You always did have a cruel streak." That almost made me smile, because there it was. The old trick hurt me, then accused me of being cruel for remembering. Margaret stood. "Mrs. Whitaker, Mr. Benton, there are seats along the side wall for interested parties. The main table is reserved for beneficiaries, estate representatives, and counsel for the estate." Marlene looked at the side chairs like they were an insult. Good, they were. She sat down stiffly. Vanessa sat beside her and kept her eyes on her hands. Margaret began at 2:15. "This is the last will and testament of Robert James Whitaker, executed on January 11th of this year, with full testamentary capacity confirmed by medical evaluation and witnessed according to Illinois law." Charles Benton made a note. Marlene leaned forward. Margaret read through the opening sections. Uncle Robert's assets included real estate holdings, investment accounts, business shares, personal property, and charitable funds. The total estate value was estimated at just under $34 million. I heard Marlene inhale. Vanessa looked at her mother. There it was, the number, the reason they had come. Margaret turned a page. Article 4, Specific exclusions. Marlene's posture changed slightly. Margaret read, I make no provision in this will for Marlene Elaine Whitaker, widow of my late brother Daniel Whitaker, for the following reasons, which I request be read aloud if she or her representatives are present. Marlene's face froze. Charles Benton stopped writing. Margaret continued, Marlene was married to my brother at the time of his death. Upon Daniel's passing, she became the legal guardian of his minor daughter, Anne Grace Whitaker. 4 days after Daniel's funeral, Marlene voluntarily transferred custodial rights and guardianship authority over Anne to me, Robert James Whitaker. Marlene stood. This is inappropriate. Margaret did not look up. She did so by written agreement, signed and notarized on October 18, 2010. In that agreement, Marlene Elaine Whitaker waived any future claim to parental authority, reimbursement, financial compensation, or custodial interest regarding Anne Grace Whitaker. That was not what that paper meant, Marlene snapped. Margaret looked at her over her glasses. It is exactly what that paper meant. Charles Benton reached for Marlene's arm. Please sit down, but Marlene pulled away. I was grieving. I had just lost my husband. Robert pressured me. For the first time, I spoke. No, he didn't. Every face turned toward me. My voice was calm, but my hands were cold under the table. You packed my clothes before he arrived. You told me I was leaving before he even got there. You had already decided I was not your problem. Marlene's eyes flashed. You were a child. You don't understand what was happening. I understood that my father was dead. I understood that my mother was dead. I understood that the woman he trusted to take care of me put my life into trash bags and made me wait outside like garbage. Vanessa closed her eyes. Marlene's lips parted, but no sound came out. I continued, You didn't throw out an orphan, Marlene. You threw out the last living piece of the man you claimed to love. The room went completely still. Margaret let the silence sit for a moment. Then she continued. Article 5, Legal Adoption. Marlene's head snapped toward her. Margaret read, On June 4, 2012, I legally adopted Anne Grace Whitaker. From that date forward, she has been my daughter in every legal, practical, and emotional sense. I make this statement not to erase her parents, Grace and Daniel, whom she loved and lost, but to affirm what Marlene abandoned and what I chose. My eyes burned. I looked down at the silver key around my neck. Margaret's voice remained steady. Anne was not a burden I accepted. She was a child I was honored to raise. I pressed my lips together to keep from crying. Marlene sat down slowly. All the confidence had drained from her face. Charles Benton whispered something to her, but she didn't seem to hear him. Margaret turned another page. Article 6, Sole Beneficiary. That was when the room seemed to hold its breath. I leave the entirety of my estate, including my ownership interest in Whitaker Holdings, all real property, investment accounts, liquid assets, and personal effects, to my daughter, Anne Grace Whitaker. Marlene made a sound. Not a word. A sound. Vanessa covered her mouth. Charles Benton stared at his notes like he hoped another will might appear there. Margaret continued reading Uncle Robert's words. Anne has worked beside me for more than a decade. She knows this company, its employees, its tenants, and its values. She did not inherit my trust through blood alone. She earned it through character, discipline, loyalty, and courage. I couldn't stop the tears then. I let them fall. Because for 15 years I had been trying to prove I had not been thrown away because I was worthless. And there he was, even after death, telling the room I had always been worth choosing. Marlene suddenly stood again. This is manipulation. She manipulated him. She turned him against me. I looked at her. You didn't need my help for that. Her face twisted. I took care of you for 8 years. No, I said. You tolerated me while my father was alive. She flinched as if I had slapped her. You ungrateful little Marlene, Charles Benton warned. But she was past listening. You think you're better than us 'cause Robert gave you everything? You think sitting there in your expensive suit makes you his daughter? I touched the key necklace. No, Him showing up when you threw me out made me his daughter. The court papers just caught up. Someone at the far end of the table quietly exhaled. Margaret slid a copy of the guardianship transfer and adoption decree across the table toward Charles Benton. "For counsel's review," she said. "Given these documents, I would strongly advise your client to reconsider any challenge to the estate." Charles read the first page. Then the second. His face changed, not dramatically. Lawyers are trained better than that. But I saw it. He knew the case was dead. Marlene leaned toward him. "Well?" Charles lowered his voice, but not enough. "We need to discuss this privately." "No, say it here." "Marlene," he said carefully, "these documents create significant obstacles." "Obstacles?" "Your standing is questionable." "Very questionable. I was Daniel's wife. You were not Robert's heir. I raised Anne." I almost laughed. Charles glanced at me, then back at her. "The documents suggest otherwise." Marlene stared at him. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely lost. Not sad, not sorry, lost. As if the story she had told herself for 15 years had suddenly been taken away, and she did not know who to be without it. Margaret asked if she could continue. Marlene did not answer. So Margaret continued. There were charitable gifts. A scholarship fund for children who had lost parents. A housing support fund for young adults aging out of foster care. Donations to the hospital where Uncle Robert had received treatment. Then Margaret opened a smaller envelope. Robert also left a personal letter for Anne with permission for a portion to be read aloud at her discretion. She looked at me. I nodded. Margaret unfolded the letter. "My dearest Anne, if this is being read in a room where Marlene has come looking for money, then I am sorry but not surprised." Strange laugh broke out of me through my tears. Even Margaret's mouth twitched before she continued. "You once asked me whether your father would have been disappointed in what happened after he died. The answer is yes, but not in you. Never in you. Daniel would have been heartbroken that the woman he trusted failed his daughter so completely." Marlene looked down. For once, she did not interrupt. "You were 14 when you came to me with your life in trash bags. I wish I had arrived sooner. I wish I had seen more while Daniel was alive. I cannot change that. What I could do was make sure you never had to beg for a place in someone's home." Again, my shoulders started to shake. Margaret's voice softened. "You became the finest part of my life. You are not my consolation prize. You are not my obligation. You are my daughter. And if anyone in that room tries to make you feel guilty for receiving what I freely chose to give, remember this: people who abandon responsibility do not get to return for reward." Marlene covered her face. I didn't know if she was crying from guilt, humiliation, or the loss of money. Maybe all three. Margaret read the final line. "Stand tall, Annie. You are loved. You were chosen, and you owe them nothing. Forever, your Uncle Robert, your father in every way that mattered." "Annie," I broke. Not politely, not gracefully. I put my hand over my mouth and cried into my palm while Mrs. Alvarez, who had come to the reading as one of Uncle Robert's longtime household employees, moved behind my chair and placed both hands on my shoulders. For a moment, I was 14 again. Then I wasn't. I was 29. I was sitting at the table. I was the one who stayed. Marlene made one final attempt. Of course she did. She stood up slowly, wiping under her eyes. "And," she said, and this time her voice was soft, "I know I made mistakes. Mistakes, that word again. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is burning dinner. A mistake is saying something harsh and regretting it. Packing a child's life into trash bags after her father's funeral is not a mistake. It is a decision." "I was grieving," Marlene continued. "I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what else to do. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, 'You could have loved me.'" Her face crumpled. Maybe that was the first time the truth landed. Maybe not. "I did love you in my own way," she whispered. "No," I said. "You loved my father. And when he was gone, I became evidence of a life you didn't want to deal with." Vanessa started crying quietly beside her. I turned to my stepsister. And you watched. Vanessa nodded, tears running down her face. I know. Those two words surprised me. Not because they fixed anything. They didn't. But because they were the first honest words anyone from that house had spoken to me. Marlene reached toward me. Can we please talk privately? We don't have to discuss the money. I just want my family back. I stood. You don't want your family back. You want the version of the story where you were a struggling widow who made a hard choice. But that isn't what happened. Her hand dropped. You don't know what it was like. You're right, I said. I don't know what it was like to lose a husband and then throw away his daughter. But I know what it was like to be that daughter. No one moved. No one breathed. I picked up Uncle Robert's letter and held it against my chest. You had 15 years to contact me when there was nothing to gain. You waited until there was a will. Marlene whispered, Anne. No, you don't get to use my name like it still belongs in your mouth. Her face went pale again. I looked at Margaret. Can we finish? Margaret nodded. The remaining articles were read. The meeting ended at 4:03 p.m. Charles Benton gathered his papers quickly. He told Marlene they needed to leave. She looked like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to fight with. Vanessa stood by the door, hesitating. For a second, I thought she would come over. She didn't. She followed her mother out, just like she had followed her down the hallway 15 years earlier, carrying my books to the porch. After they left, the room felt lighter. Not happy, just lighter, like a storm had moved on. Mrs. Alvarez hugged me hard. He would be proud, she whispered. I closed my eyes. I hope so. No, she said firmly. He would be. 3 weeks later, Marlene sent me an email. The subject line was, please. I almost deleted it. Instead, I opened it while sitting in Uncle Robert's study at the desk that was now mine. And I know you probably hate me. I understand why you said what you said. The will reading was emotional for everyone. I have had time to think, and I realize I made choices after your father died that hurt you deeply. I was scared I was alone. I had Vanessa to protect. Maybe I didn't handle things the right way, and I did what I thought was best at the time. I hope someday you can understand that. I am not asking for money. I am asking for a conversation. Your father would not want us to be strangers. Love, Marlene. I read it twice, then a third time. There was no real apology. No mention of the trash bags. No mention of making me wait outside. No mention of signing me away. No mention of 15 years of silence. Just soft words wrapped around excuses. I wrote back 4 sentences. Marlene, I received your email. I forgave you years ago because I refused to carry you forever. But forgiveness does not mean access, and it does not mean reconciliation. Please do not contact me again. I stared at the message for almost a minute before sending it. When I finally clicked send, I expected to feel cruel. I didn't. I felt clean. Vanessa wrote to me 2 months later. Not an email, a letter. Handwritten. I almost didn't open it, but something about the envelope made me pause. Maybe because Marlene would never have written by hand. Too much effort, too much honesty in ink. Vanessa's letter was short. Anne, I am not writing for Mom. She doesn't know I'm sending this. I'm not asking for money or forgiveness. I just need to say what I should have said years ago. I watched you on the porch that day. I knew it was wrong. I knew Mom was being cruel. I was 16, and I told myself it wasn't my business because you weren't really my sister. But that was a coward's excuse. You were a child who had just lost her father, and I helped carry your things out. I have thought about that more times than you probably want to know. I'm sorry, not because of the will, not because Mom lost. I'm sorry because you deserved one person in that house to stand beside you, and I didn't. I understand if you never answer. Vanessa. I sat with that letter for a long time. It did not heal me, but it was different from Marlene's email. There were no excuses, no requests. No, but I was young. No, you have to understand, just the truth. I didn't respond for 6 weeks. When I finally did, I kept it simple. Vanessa, I read your letter. Thank you for acknowledging what happened without trying to soften it. I am not ready for a relationship, but I am open to one conversation. Not about money, not about Marlene, and not about the past unless I choose to go there. If you can respect that, we can talk. She replied the next day, I can respect that. Our first call lasted 11 minutes. It was awkward. Painfully awkward. She told me she had 2 children, a son named Miles and a daughter named Sophie. She worked as an office manager at a dental clinic. She had divorced 3 years earlier. I told her almost nothing, and that was fine. Trust is not a door you kick open. Sometimes it is a window you unlock 1 inch at a time. A year after the will reading, I stood outside the first apartment building Uncle Robert ever bought. We had renovated it and renamed it the Daniel House, not after Uncle Robert, after my father. Because grief is complicated and love without courage can fail a child, but love still matters. A bronze plaque by the entrance read, "The Daniel House, dedicated to children who deserve safety, stability, and a place to come home to." Part of the building's income now funded a scholarship for teenagers who had lost parents and needed help. Staying in school, joining summer programs, or escaping unsafe homes. The first recipient was a 14-year-old girl named Maya, whose mother had died and whose relatives were fighting over who had to take her. When I read her application, I had to close my laptop and walk away. Then I approved the full grant. Some stories echo. The point is to make sure they don't repeat. Whitaker Holdings grew that year. The company was stable. The employees stayed. The charities Uncle Robert loved continued receiving support. Mrs. Alvarez still came by once a week, even though she had technically retired, mostly to make sure I was eating. Vanessa and I talked once a month. Marlene never contacted me again. Sometimes people ask whether I was happy after everything. That's not the right word. Happiness is too simple. What I felt was peace. The kind of peace that comes when the person who tried to write you out of the family story realizes you have been holding the pen for years. For most of my childhood, I believed love was something I had to earn by being convenient, quiet, useful, easy to ignore. Marlene taught me that a child could be treated like an obligation. Uncle Robert taught me that a child could be chosen. And those 2 lessons shaped the rest of my life. Here is what I know now. The people who abandon you do not get to decide the meaning of your survival. They do not get to come back years later and rename their cruelty as sacrifice. They do not get to call themselves family only when family becomes profitable. Forgiveness is yours to give. Access is yours to deny. And blood, marriage, history, grief, none of it gives someone the right to walk back into your life. After they chose to leave you outside in the cold, my name is Anne Whitaker. When I was 14, my stepmother packed my life into trash bags and said I was no longer her responsibility. 15 years later, she came looking for my uncle's millions, but all she found was her own signature, and for the first time in my life, that was enough.